Hi, my name's Danny Crone. I'm the Technical Director for nFocus. nFocus are a software testing consultancy. We're also Gold Application Lifecycle Management Partners for Microsoft. Today's podcast, we're going to be talking about Agile testing and how TFS can support that. What we're going to explore in this particular podcast is what Agile means for testing, what are some of those challenges presented by Agile, and finally we're going to take a look at how TFS and Visual Studio 2010 can solve some of those problems. So what does Agile mean for us in testing? Well, firstly, I guess that Agile is really a rapid development life cycle. Generally contains some iterative development and often is involved with continuous integration, continuous build and integration really. When we deal with Agile, we often deal with steel threads through the application as we develop that application through the whole life cycle. Generally, we'll see short sprints, and these days we're talking a lot about a multifaceted team, so this is where testers can develop code and developers can test code. Now, we're not going to cover Agile or some of the Agile methodologies in any detail, but what I would like to look at is what the challenges are for testing when we're working in this new Agile way. And the first thing I'd like to cover is the refactoring of code. Now, this happens a lot across sprints, particularly, but also sometimes within a sprint. And this tends to exaggerate the regression testing problem that we're familiar with throughout any software development lifecycle. So as the sprints get bigger, therefore our regression bucket and regression problem also increases in size. And as we talked about before, these multifaceted members of the team, where the testers should be able to write code, actually finding those kind of testers is very difficult. Or indeed finding a developer that actually is very good at testing is also a difficult breed of person to find. Now, we believe that these testers should be able to read code and probably more importantly be able to write automated tests, which does involve some level of coding. Another challenge is, how do we make sure that our coverage is complete? How do we make sure that we've covered all requirements and covered all parts of the application? So with Agile, exploratory testing becomes more important, and exploratory testing by nature is less structured. So indeed, getting the balance right of structured testing and exploratory testing is important. Another challenge is not actually having enough of the application to test. When we're talking about this steel thread, then often we find that there's bits of the application that we might need for testing that we can't actually get to. So being able to write some stubs and harnesses becomes quite important. And of course, often we have to interface with other applications outside of the project, and so integration testing does become important. So things like stubs and harnesses need to be written. Now, I'm not saying that this is true everywhere, but often we find the Agile teams that we work with are not necessarily following any predefined methodology like Scrum or DSDM. And so having a tool that can support the way in which the team is developing code and testing code is important. And of course, we still need to be able to report in this fast-paced development environment. And so having tools available that will collate this kind of information is important as well. So let's take a look at how TFS and Visual Studio 2010 can help with these challenges in Agile. And when we tend to break down Agile projects, we look at the Agile testing quadrants. And this is an idea that was originally put forward by Brian Merrick, but basically breaks down types of testing into 4 different quadrants. And you know, there's a lot of different aspects to this, but effectively there's different types of tests: unit tests, component tests, functional tests, maybe even story tests. And of course we deal with exploratory testing, and of course some of the more technology-facing tests like performance testing and security testing. And what's important here is that the tooling can support all of these different types of tests to allow reporting to actually happen. And TFS can support a lot of these different types of testing. Probably one of the more important features of TFS is process templates. Now, these help shape the process either if a methodology is being followed or even if it's not. There are some pre-canned process templates like Agile for MSF, Scrum, and there's always new ones being brought out. But of course, this process template can be modified. And what this does is it allows us to shape the way that assets are defined, so how requirements are defined, how bugs are defined, what sort of fields we see on a test case, and those kinds of things. But also the workflow. It helps us define the workflow and also define the way in which we're going to work. So who is it that can actually retest a bug, and when does that actually happen? So if we look at some of the specific tools within the Microsoft TFS and Visual Studio 2010 space, then the Microsoft Test Manager is the thing that testers will become most familiar with, and it contains the notion of test plans. Now, these test plans can be designed to cover different phases of testing, whether that be system integration, and so on. But there are also good units to report against, and you might see one test plan for a sprint, for example. So they're very useful at organising a sprint's testing efforts. Now, Microsoft Test Manager has a lot of great features around being able to interact with other project assets like the bugs and requirements and change requests, those kinds of things. And it allows us to be able to prioritize test cases and prioritize requirements to allow us to do some kind of risk management. But the real win comes when we're actually executing tests using the test runner, and it's from here that we can actually create action recordings. And these action recordings monitor all the steps that the tester is performing so that they can be played back again later in a fast-forward type way. This means that we get some kind of lightweight automation, and non-technical testers can be involved in being able to make the testing effort more efficient. But it's also whilst using this test runner that bugs can be created, and it's the fact that these bugs are also linked to the test cases in which they were found that means that you get a very joined up approach as far as the project assets are concerned. And this is a feature that I really love, because what it means is that I can create bugs very quickly from a test case and not have to worry about putting in all of the steps that I was executing to build up to that particular bug. But all the information is put into that bug for me. All of the steps, all of my expected outcomes and the actual outcomes, everything that I recorded as I went along is now downloaded into the bug, so a developer can actually see blow by blow what I was doing. And in fact, they can see it because there's also video that can be turned on to allow that video then to be attached to the bug as well. Now, the test runner actually supports the notion of exploratory testing, but in vNext we know that there's a lot more coming as far as exploratory testing, whereby the tester will be allowed to define what their exploratory session is going to be and then record facts and artifacts along their journey throughout the application without necessarily having this very scripted approach to the test case. But also it does have the ability to be able to turn those sessions into specific test cases after the fact, and so exploratory testing will become a very good way to actually create your scripted tests. Now, if the team are doing either test-driven development or behavior-driven development, then there are tools within Visual Studio to allow that to take place. Traditional unit testing can be used for test-driven development, but also there's third-party add-ins for things like behavioral-driven development. Now, we touched on some of the lightweight facilities as far as automation was concerned earlier on. But of course, those fast-forward scripts that we talked about can also be taken into a coded UI test, which is what I like to term full-fat test automation. And for me, this is really a bit of a journey, really, where everybody can be involved in this journey to full test automation, whereby the tests are recorded initially with fast forward and then migrated later to coded UI tests by more technical people and possibly even some of the developers in the team. What's great about this is that these automated test assets can then be included in the build, and so as part of a continuous integration build process, you can include the automated tests. So not only does the application get built, but it gets deployed to a test environment, and then the automated tests are actually run against it. And so very quickly you get these feedback loops that tell you what the quality of the code is like. Now, as we're executing these tests, whether they be the manual tests, the exploratory tests, or indeed the automated tests, all of the information about the progress of those tests are actually being loaded into the central repository, this TFS, where all of the project assets reside, which means that reporting is now quick and easy. It's also accessible to everybody in the team, which gives us demonstrable coverage as well. And through the use of dashboards, we can see an overall picture of the project or sprint within which we're working. And I think the consistent use of one set of tools means that everybody gets to participate in this process. As a result of all of this, it means the team can work in a very efficient way with very little impediments in order to move the project forward and have a successful outcome, even if they're operating within this agile, fast-paced environment. Well, we're really excited about these ALM tools from Microsoft and the amazing level of support for testing that they've built in. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this. My name is Danny Crone from nFocus. We will be at EuroSTAR with Microsoft in the exhibition hall, and we'd love to discuss these tools in more detail with you, so please do pop in and see us while you're in Manchester. Thank you very much.